You said in 2000 that the prospect of Iran attacking Israel was like the prospect that it would invade Mars.
Well, I didn't use those words, but essentially that might be
right. No, you actually did. I looked at the transcript. Yeah.
Okay.
And the reality is that the biggest existential threat that Israel faces is from Iran. If Iran attacked Israel, would the United States under President Paul intervene?
They wouldn't need to. Israel has 300 nuclear weapons and missiles. The odds are so remote. Iran can't even make enough gasoline for themselves. They have to import gasoline. So they don't have intercontinental ballistic missiles. They don't have a nuclear weapon. There's a big discussion going on how far along they are. And I was in the service and lived through the 60s. The Soviets had 30,000 of them, and they were going to bury us. And we survived that. So for us to plan to go to war against Iran under these conditions scares a lot of Americans. It certainly scares the young people of the world, the people I talk to, because they're going to bear this burden financially, and also they may be required to fight these wars that are unnecessary and unconstitutional.
Congressman Paul, you say that we should cut off all foreign aid to the Middle East and, quote, let them take care of themselves. You say the prison at Guantanamo should be closed, that the detainees there have not been given due process. Governor Pawlenty said a couple of months ago that bullies respect strength, not weakness. Is Governor Pawlenty wrong?
Well, I think strength is good, but you have to have strength in doing the right things. I think secret military prisons, keeping people there for years and years without due process, is not a characteristic of a republic that believes in freedom. It is just not the process. It's more typical of an authoritarian government to have secret prisons. So therefore, I don't think it serves our purpose. We have tried nearly 300 suspects in civilian courts, and hundreds of them have been convicted and put away. So why are we afraid of openness? Why do we have to move in the direction of giving up the right of habeas corpus, which someday, if we're not careful, will affect American citizens? We should treat people the way we think we might be treated under dire circumstances. And our dire circumstances are moving right along because we may have real trouble in this country, and we may be subject to the same type of treatment. So we do not need secret prisons, nor do we need the torture that goes on in these secret military prisons.
Do you think the drone war that this administration is waging is illegal?
Yes, it is. It's illegal under international law, and there's no authority in our Constitution that we can just willy-nilly drop bombs on anybody that we want. We kill innocent people this way. Why do you think people hate us? Because there's so much collateral damage. You see, oh, this is a bad guy. We'll drop a bomb on him and kill him. Well, we might hit him, we might miss him, we might hit another car, and then you kill 10 other people. What would we do if they did that to us, David? We would be a little upset if China did that to us, wouldn't we?
Osama bin Laden is dead. We've been in Afghanistan for 10 years. Isn't it time to bring our combat troops home from Afghanistan?
Let me continue, and that is, I think we've learned some important lessons in our experience in Afghanistan. I want those troops to come home based upon not politics, not based upon economics, but instead based upon the conditions on the ground determined by the generals. But I also think we've learned that our troops shouldn't go off and try and fight a war of independence for another nation. Only the Afghanis can win Afghanistan's independence from the Taliban. Thank you.
Congressman Paul, do you agree with that position?
Not quite. You know, I served 5 years in the military. I've had a little experience. I've spent a little bit of time over in the Pakistan, Afghanistan area, as well as in Iran. But I wouldn't wait for my generals. I'm the commander-in-chief. I make the decisions. I tell the generals what to do, and I'd bring them home as quickly as possible, and I'd get them out of Iraq as well, and I wouldn't start a war in Libya. I'd quit bombing Yemen, and I'd quit bombing Pakistan. I'd start taking care of people here at home because we could save hundreds of billions of dollars. Our national security is not enhanced by our presence over there. We have no purpose there. We should learn the lessons of history, and the longer we're there, the worse things are and the more danger we're in as well, because our presence there is not making friends, let me tell you.
Congressman Paul, you have wanted to pull U.S. troops out of Afghanistan for years. In fact, you said on the House floor about the U.S. military's efforts in Afghanistan, quote, "Whose interests do we serve by continuing this exercise in futility?" So if President Paul had been running things and troops were already out of Afghanistan, wouldn't that mean that Osama bin Laden would be alive today?
Absolutely not. I mean, he wasn't caught in Afghanistan. Nation building in Afghanistan and telling those people how to live and getting involved in running their country hardly had anything to do with finding the information where he was being held in a country that we give billions of dollars of foreign aid to. At the same time, we're bombing that country. So it's the policy that's at fault. No, not having the troops in Afghanistan wouldn't have hurt. But we went to Afghanistan to get him, and he hasn't been there. Now that he's killed, boy, it is a wonderful time for this country now to reassess it and get the troops out of Afghanistan and end that war that hasn't helped us and hasn't helped anybody in the Middle East. But we also spend endlessly for the entitlement system. The entitlement system is based on a concept that totally rejects the issue of rights. You have a right to your life and your liberty, and you should have the right to what you earn. But the entitlement system says you don't have a right to keep what you earn. People who want something from you, they can send a government agent to steal it from you and give it to them, and that's called an entitlement. Believe me, we've had quite a few generations now that believe in this, and when their goods and services aren't forthcoming, they're going to be very upset, and a bunch of them are getting pretty upset already. But the real reason the entitlement system is so dangerous is the entitlement system is sold on the idea that we're going to help the poor. Sure, help the poor. If you look carefully, you'll find out it helps the rich. And that's what the monetary system does, and that's what the entitlement system does. The best example of this is the housing bubble that we had. The housing bubble went on for a good many years. They inflated the currency, printed the money, everybody loved it. Then they had the Barney Franks of the world come in and say we have to have this Community Reinvestment Act and force banks to give bad loans. Sure, and the people bought the houses, and the price of the houses went up. They'd borrow more money against their houses. Permanent prosperity, they claim. But guess what? The bubble that was truly predicted by the Austrian free market economists came, and it burst. It collapsed. So both political leaders, both parties went, and they said, we got to bail them out. It's a disaster, or we'll have a depression. And the truth is, if they hadn't bailed them out, Wall Street would have had a depression, not the people. But we bailed... So we bailed out the people who made a lot of money. They were in the financing business. They were in the building business. They were in the mortgage business. They were in the derivatives business. And they talked this country, and unfortunately, they dumped it all on you. So they bailed out the people who ripped us off and dumped those securities on us. The Federal Reserve now, with money they create clear air, they hold $1 trillion of derivatives and worthless assets. That's why your money value goes down. That's why your prices go up. That's why medical care costs too much. That's why education costs too much. So it's this whole concept of money coming to the rescue of the rich and dumping on the poor. Yet how often do we as libertarians and conservatives get blamed and say, oh, you mean you don't want the government taking care of everybody? You heartless people, you have no compassion. But the true compassion comes from liberty. Free markets, sound money. Is the answer to our economic woes. The one thing it won't do, it won't create perfect economic equality. And that's what the socialists want. Perfect economic equality. And they're pretty good at achieving it at a very, very low level. And people are equally poor. That's not what we want. What we want is opportunity for people to work and keep what they earn. We need the government to be involved. It's not like the government shouldn't exist. But the government shouldn't be the regulator. They shouldn't be the inflator. They shouldn't be the fixer of the interest rates. And they shouldn't be bailing out the rich. So... But in a free market, there are some very strict regulations. Property rights. You can't take another person's property. You can't steal. You can't hurt people. You follow up on your contracts. You can't counterfeit money. And
if you mess up, you know what should happen? You should go bankrupt. The other people shouldn't bail you out. And if you do well, you have the right to keep what you earn.
As you know, millions of people have lost their jobs over the last couple of years, and especially the older workers, those 50 and older. How do we get those people working again to get the economy going again?
Well, you have to get rid of the recession, and you can't get rid of the recession unless you know where it came from. And the financial bubbles, when they burst, they give you recessions or depression, and we're on the verge of being in a depression for the people who aren't working. Even the young people aren't getting jobs either. So, and this is where I think there's a lot of lack of understanding, because the business cycle comes from the Federal Reserve creating credit, causing interest rates to be lower than they should, and then investors doing the wrong thing, and this creates malinvestment and too much debt. And then when it gets out of whack, the markets send the message and say, you can't sustain this much debt because you built too many houses, you borrowed too much money, you built too much of these things. So the correction has to come in, and the worst thing you can do is to prevent the correction from happening in just propping up bad debt, and that's what we did in 08. There was a lot of bad debt. So the people who were benefiting by the bubble got bailed out, and they dumped the derivatives and the debt onto the people. Then they ended up losing their jobs and losing their houses, and now we're in the midst of this. So if we don't understand that, we don't understand why we have to have less government propping up of the economy. We want to allow these corrections to occur. But you can do a lot of things. Tax codes can be changed. The regulatory code has to be changed. You take something like Sarbanes-Oxley, which was a Republican program. It's cost the businessman $1 trillion. And Dodd-Frank, just recently, it was put in. That cost another $1 trillion. Now the businessman is anticipating all the regulations and the expense from Obama medical care. So if you have that, if you don't correct the monetary system and a tax code and a regulatory system, it's going to be hard to have a recovery. And of course, this is the reason I think spending is the big problem, and why I advise that you do a lot of cutting. And I believe you can't have a recovery unless you understand that, and I have advocated that you get rid of departments as well as cutting spending up to $1 trillion in the first year.
How is that possible that a draconian cut like this would not hurt anybody, particularly in this economy?
Because we have to take this money from the economy, and the politicians get to spend it. So that's a negative. It hurts the economy. After World War II, we cut spending by 60% and cut taxes. 10 million people came home. And all the money and the expenditures went back to the people, and that was finally, we got over the Depression by having these draconian cuts.
But you have the education system in the state that it's in with big federal contributions now, nuclear energy safeguards after what happened in Japan, environmental protections. Nobody gets hurt under President Paul's plan?
You know, we cut back on those, and the Department of Energy I cut, but some of those things are just transferred to the DOD department, you know, nuclear controls and things like that. So they aren't eliminated, but they are significant. I'm the only one that's offering it. I mean, if spending is a problem, which all the candidates have claimed, spending too much and the debt's too big, but who's proposing it? See, to me, the question I ask myself is, what should the role of government be? And I've come down on the conclusion that it shouldn't be that we're the policemen of the world and we have this runaway entitlement spending. So therefore, if the role of government is the constitutional approach, you can't keep spending like this, because now we face this worldwide crisis of sovereign debt. That's our big problem, but you can't deal with that unless you cut spending.
The Fed chief has said to focus so exclusively on debt reduction as you would do could harm our prospects of reviving economic growth.
I just used a perfect example. By draconian cuts after World War II, it stimulated the economy because the resources aren't diminished, the resources are put back into the economy, and the people spend the money. But now all we do is give them debt. We tax, we borrow, and then we inflate, and then we distort the economy, so we destroy the production because the government takes over the economy, and that's the negative.